The gym smelled of sweat and steel, a place where hearts raced for reasons beyond love. But that night, as Elias Torres pushed through his final set of deadlifts, his eyes locked with a stranger's across the mirrored wall, and something shifted, like the earth tilting just enough to change the course of a river. By morning, that stranger would be brewing coffee in Elias's kitchen, but the path to that moment was anything but simple. Elias, 26, was a graphic designer with a knack for turning chaos into art, both on his laptop and in his life. Born to Puerto Rican parents in Chicago, he carried a quiet intensity, his dark eyes always searching for meaning in the mundane. He'd been single for 2 years, not for lack of trying, but because no one seemed to fit the jagged edges of his heart. The gym was his sanctuary, a place to drown out the noise of a city that never slept and a heart that never settled. That evening, the gym in Logan Square was alive with the clank of weights and the hum of treadmills. Elias adjusted his grip on the barbell, his muscles straining under the weight, when he noticed him. A man about his age, maybe 27, with curly blonde hair that caught the fluorescent lights like a halo. He was doing pull-ups, his lean frame moving with a grace that made Elias's breath hitch. Their eyes met in the mirror, and the stranger's lips curved into a shy smile before he looked away. Elias felt a spark, like a match struck in the dark. He didn't know then that this man, Caleb Winters, was a barista and aspiring poet who'd moved to Chicago from a small town in Oregon. Caleb had a softness to him, a warmth that radiated even in the cold steel of the gym. His green eyes held stories he hadn't yet told, and his hands, calloused from years of manual labor, were gentle in ways Elias would soon discover. Elias finished his set, his heart pounding for reasons that had little to do with exercise. He wiped his face with a towel, stealing glances at Caleb, who was now stretching near the water fountain. The air between them felt charged, like the moment before a storm. Elias wasn't one to make the first move. Rejection stung too much, but something about Caleb's quiet confidence pulled him forward. "Hey," Elias said, approaching with a casualness he didn't feel. "You always make pull-ups look that easy?" Caleb laughed, a sound like wind chimes on a summer day. "Only when someone's watching," he said, his voice low and teasing. "I'm Caleb." "Elias." They shook hands, and Elias swore he felt a current pass through their palms. They talked for a few minutes about the gym, the city, the way Chicago winters could break a person. It was easy, natural, like they'd known each other for years. When Caleb mentioned he was new to the city, Elias offered to show him around. "There's a diner on Milwaukee Avenue that makes the best late-night pancakes," he said, hoping he didn't sound too eager. Caleb's eyes lit up, and just like that, they were walking out into the crisp October night, their gym bags slung over their shoulders. The diner was a neon-lit haven, its booths filled with the kind of people who thrived in the small hours: artists, insomniacs, and dreamers. Elias and Caleb slid into a corner booth, the vinyl creaking under them. Over stacks of pancakes drowned in syrup, they talked about everything and nothing. Caleb shared how he'd left Oregon to escape a family that didn't understand him, a family that saw his love for men as a sin to be fixed. Elias opened up about his own struggles, growing up in a community where machismo often drowned out vulnerability, where being gay felt like a secret he had to guard. "I used to think I had to be someone else to be loved," Elias admitted, stirring his coffee. "Like I had to hide parts of myself to fit in." Caleb reached across the table, his fingers brushing Elias's wrist. "You don't have to hide anything with me," he said, his voice steady but soft. The touch was fleeting, but it left Elias's skin tingling, like a promise of something more. They left the diner at 2 a.m., the city quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Caleb walked Elias to his apartment, a modest walk-up in Wicker Park. At the door, Elias hesitated, then took a chance. "Want to come up? I make a mean cup of coffee." Caleb grinned. "You had me at coffee." Inside, the apartment was a reflection of Elias. Colorful sketches pinned to the walls, books stacked haphazardly on shelves, a record player spinning a soft jazz tune. They sat on the couch, mugs of coffee warming their hands, and talked until the sky began to lighten. Somewhere between stories of their pasts and dreams for the future, Caleb leaned in, and Elias met him halfway. Their first kiss was tentative, then sure, a collision of longing and relief that felt like coming home. But the world outside Elias's apartment wasn't as kind as that moment. Caleb's past in Oregon wasn't just a story. It was a shadow that followed him. His family, devout and unyielding, had cut him off when he came out at 19. He'd built a new life, but the scars remained, and they'd soon test the fragile bond forming between him and Elias. As dawn broke, Caleb stood in Elias's kitchen, brewing coffee like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Elias watched him, heart full but wary, knowing that love, like any good design, required work to hold together. And work, it would turn out, was something they'd both have to do. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments and late-night talks. Elias and Caleb fell into a rhythm, their lives intertwining like vines climbing a trellis. Caleb would show up at Elias's apartment after his shifts at the coffee shop, his apron still dusted with espresso grounds, and Elias would greet him with a sketchpad in hand, ideas spilling out faster than he could draw them. They were building something, fragile but real, in the heart of a city that didn't always make space for softness. Elias introduced Caleb to his world: art galleries in Pilsen, jazz clubs in Uptown, quiet walks along Lake Michigan where the water stretched endless and blue. Caleb, in turn, showed Elias the poetry he scribbled on napkins during slow hours at work, words that cut deep with their honesty. "You make me want to write about hope," Caleb said one night, his head resting on Elias's shoulder as they sat on a pier, the city skyline glittering in the distance. Elias felt his chest tighten, not with fear but with the weight of possibility. But possibility came with complications. Elias's friends, a tight-knit group of creatives, welcomed Caleb with open arms, but not everyone in his life was as accepting. His older brother, Miguel, a mechanic with a traditional streak, had always been supportive but distant when it came to Elias's identity. When Elias brought Caleb to a family dinner at their parents' house in Humboldt Park, Miguel's silence was louder than words. He didn't say anything cruel, but his stiff handshake and averted eyes told Caleb everything he needed to know. "Your brother hates me," Caleb said later, as they walked back to the train station. His voice was light, but his eyes were heavy. "He doesn't hate you," Elias said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "He's just stuck in his ways. Give him time." Caleb nodded, but the doubt lingered. Elias wanted to fix it, to make his family see Caleb the way he did, but he knew some bridges took longer to cross than others. Meanwhile, Caleb's past began to creep into their present. One evening, as they sat in a cozy bookstore in Andersonville, Caleb's phone buzzed with a message that made his face go pale. It was from his sister, Hannah, the only family member who'd stayed in touch after he left Oregon. She wrote that their parents had found out where he was living. They were coming to Chicago, not to reconcile but to save him, to drag him back to a life he'd fought to escape. "They think I'm broken," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They think they can fix me with prayers and guilt." Elias reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're not broken, Caleb, and you're not alone anymore." But words couldn't erase the fear in Caleb's eyes. That night, they stayed up until dawn, Caleb recounting the years of shame and rejection, the conversion therapy sessions his parents had forced him into as a teenager. Elias listened, his heart aching with every word, but he also felt a fierce determination to protect Caleb, to be the home he'd never had. The next day, Elias took Caleb to a community center in Boys Town, a place where queer folks gathered for support and celebration. The center was hosting an open mic night, and Caleb, with a nudge from Elias, read one of his poems aloud. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke of love and resilience, the room fell silent, captivated. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, and Elias couldn't stop grinning, pride swelling in his chest. "You were incredible," Elias said as they left, pulling Caleb into a hug. "You're stronger than you know." Caleb smiled, but it was tinged with worry. "What if they show up, Elias? What if they find me?" "Then we face them together," Elias said, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere." Their relationship deepened, but so did the challenges. Caleb's parents were relentless, sending letters and voicemails filled with scripture and pleas for him to come home. Each message chipped away at Caleb's confidence, making him question whether he deserved the happiness he'd found with Elias. Elias, meanwhile, was grappling with his own doubts. Could he be enough for Caleb, enough to help him carry the weight of his past? One rainy afternoon, as they sat in Elias's apartment, Caleb broke down. "I don't want to drag you into this mess," he said, tears streaming down his face. "You deserve better than my baggage." Elias knelt in front of him, taking his face in his hands. "Your baggage is part of you, and I want all of you. We'll figure this out. Okay?" Caleb nodded, but the storm was far from over. As his parents' arrival loomed closer, the tension between them grew, testing the strength of their love and the promises they'd made. The air in Chicago turned sharp as November settled in, the city cloaked in gray skies and early frost. Elias and Caleb clung to each other, their mornings filled with coffee and quiet kisses. But the shadow of Caleb's parents loomed larger with each passing day. They were due to arrive in a week, and Caleb's anxiety was a tangible thing, a weight that pressed against the warmth they'd built together. Elias tried to keep things light, planning dates to distract Caleb from the dread. One night, they went to a drag show in Lakeview, laughing until their sides hurt as performers lip-synced to old Madonna hits. But even in the glitter and chaos of the club, Caleb's smile didn't reach his eyes. Elias could see the fear creeping in, the memories of rejection that resurfaced every time his phone buzzed with another message from Oregon. "I don't know if I can face them," Caleb admitted as they walked home, their breath visible in the cold air. "They'll look at me like I'm a stranger, like I'm someone to be fixed." Elias stopped walking, turning to face him. "You're not a stranger, Caleb. You're the man who writes poetry that makes people cry, who makes the best damn latte I've ever had, who makes me feel like I'm enough. They don't get to define you." Caleb's eyes softened, but the doubt remained. Elias knew words alone wouldn't be enough, not when Caleb's past was a wound that hadn't fully healed. He decided to take action, reaching out to the community center for advice. They connected him with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and queer identity, someone who could help Caleb prepare for the confrontation. Elias went with him to the first session, sitting quietly as Caleb poured out years of pain, his voice breaking but growing stronger with every word. The counselor, a kind woman named Marissa, helped Caleb practice setting boundaries, something he'd never been allowed to do with his family. "You have the right to choose who you let into your life," she told him. "And you have the right to protect your peace." Elias watched Caleb absorb those words, saw the spark of defiance ignite in his eyes. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. They left the session hand in hand, and for the first time in days, Caleb's grip felt steady. But the calm didn't last. 2 days before his parents were set to arrive, Caleb got a call from Hannah. Their parents had booked a hotel in downtown Chicago and wanted to meet him at a neutral location, a coffee shop near the Art Institute. They'd also invited a pastor from their church, someone who'd led the conversion therapy sessions Caleb had endured as a teenager. The news hit Caleb like a punch, and he sank onto Elias's couch, his face pale. "They're bringing him," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "The man who told me I was an abomination. They think he can talk me out of being me." Elias's blood boiled, but he kept his voice calm. "You don't have to go, Caleb. You don't owe them anything." "I know," Caleb said, but his eyes were distant. "But if I don't face them, I'll always wonder if I could have stood up to them. I need to do this for me." Elias nodded, his heart aching with pride and fear. "Then I'm coming with you. You're not doing this alone." The day of the meeting arrived, cold and gray, the kind of day that made Chicago feel like it was holding its breath. The coffee shop was bustling, a stark contrast to the tension at their table. Caleb's parents, Linda and Robert, sat stiffly across from him, their faces etched with disapproval. The pastor, a man with a thin smile and cold eyes, sat beside them, a Bible resting on the table like a weapon. "Caleb, we're here because we love you," Linda began, her voice tight. "We want you to come home, to be part of the family again." Caleb's hands trembled, but his voice was steady. "I am your son, but I'm not the person you want me to be. I'm gay, Mom. That's not going to change, and I'm done pretending it will." The pastor leaned forward, his voice smooth but cutting. "The Bible is clear, Caleb. Your lifestyle is a sin, but you can be redeemed if you choose the right path." Elias's jaw clenched, but Caleb spoke before he could. "The only path I'm choosing is the one where I get to be myself. And I'm not alone anymore." He reached for Elias's hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. Linda's eyes flicked to their joined hands, and her face crumpled. Robert said nothing, his silence heavier than words. The pastor launched into a sermon, but Caleb stood, cutting him off. "I'm done here," he said. "If you can't love me as I am, you don't get to be in my life." He walked out, Elias at his side, the weight of the moment settling over them like snow. Outside, Caleb broke down, tears streaming down his face, but there was a lightness to him, too, a release. Elias pulled him into a hug, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." But the victory was bittersweet. Caleb's parents didn't give up, and their persistence would soon push both men to their limits. The aftermath of the coffee shop confrontation left Caleb shaken but resolute. He'd drawn a line, but his parents weren't ready to let go. They began showing up at the coffee shop where Caleb worked, leaving notes with Bible verses taped to the counter, their presence a quiet but persistent threat. Elias saw the toll it took. Caleb's smiles grew rarer, his poetry darker, his sleep restless. But he also saw Caleb's strength, the way he refused to let their judgment define him. Elias did everything he could to be Caleb's anchor. He cooked dinners in his tiny kitchen, filling the apartment with the scent of arroz con pollo, a recipe from his mom. They watched old movies, curled up under a blanket, and Elias sketched Caleb while he slept, capturing the curve of his jaw, the way his lashes fanned against his cheeks. But the pressure was building, and Elias felt it too. Not just from Caleb's family, but from his own. Miguel, Elias's brother, had been distant since the family dinner, and it was starting to wear on Elias. One evening, he confronted Miguel at the auto shop where he worked, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal. "Why can't you just be happy for me?" Elias asked, his voice raw. "Caleb's important to me." Miguel sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's not about Caleb. It's just hard. I grew up thinking things were one way, and now they're different. I'm trying, Elias, but it's not easy." Elias wanted to argue, to push, but he saw the struggle in Miguel's eyes. "I just need you to try a little harder," he said quietly. "For me." Back at the apartment, Caleb was waiting with a surprise. A poem he'd written for Elias, left on the kitchen counter next to a fresh pot of coffee. The words were raw, full of love and fear, and they hit Elias like a tidal wave. He found Caleb in the living room, strumming a guitar he'd borrowed from a friend. "I didn't know you played," Elias said, sitting beside him. "I don't really," Caleb admitted, his fingers fumbling over the strings. "But I wanted to try something new. For you." They spent the night playing music, laughing at Caleb's missed chords, and for a moment, the world felt small and safe. But the next day brought a new challenge. Caleb's boss at the coffee shop, a gruff but kind woman named Rosa, pulled him aside. "Your parents came by again," she said. "They're scaring customers, Caleb. I don't want to lose you, but this can't keep happening." Caleb's face fell, and Elias, who'd stopped by to bring him lunch, overheard. "I'll talk to them," Elias said, his voice firm. Caleb tried to protest, but Elias was already out the door, heading to the hotel where Caleb's parents were staying. The confrontation was tense. Linda and Robert sat in the hotel lobby, their faces set in stone. Elias didn't mince words. "You're hurting him," he said. "You're his parents, but you're acting like his enemies. If you love him, let him live his life." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but Robert's voice was cold. "You don't understand our faith," he said. "We're trying to save his soul." "His soul doesn't need saving," Elias shot back. "It's beautiful just the way it is." He left the hotel shaking, unsure if he'd made things better or worse. When he told Caleb what happened, Caleb was quiet for a long time. "No one's ever fought for me like that," he finally said, pulling Elias into a kiss that felt like a vow. But the fight wasn't over. Caleb's parents escalated, contacting his co-workers and even showing up at the community center, spreading their message of redemption. The stress pushed Caleb to a breaking point, and one night, he told Elias he was thinking of leaving Chicago. "Maybe I need to start over somewhere else," he said, his voice barely audible. "Somewhere they can't find me." Elias felt like the ground was crumbling beneath him. "If you leave, I'm coming with you," he said, his voice fierce. "But we can't keep running. We have to build something here together." Caleb looked at him, tears in his eyes, and nodded. They spent the night planning how to protect Caleb's peace, how to carve out a life that was theirs. Elias reached out to a lawyer friend, who helped Caleb file for a restraining order against his parents. It was a painful step, but necessary, a way to reclaim his space. As winter tightened its grip on Chicago, Elias and Caleb grew stronger, their love a fire that refused to go out. But the city, with all its beauty and chaos, had one more test in store for them. Winter in Chicago was brutal, the wind slicing through coats and dreams alike. But inside Elias's apartment, warmth thrived. Caleb had all but moved in, his clothes mingling with Elias's in the closet, his poetry notebooks scattered across the coffee table. Every morning, Caleb brewed coffee, and every morning, he kissed Elias awake, a ritual that felt like a promise kept. Yet, the shadow of Caleb's parents lingered, a reminder that love, no matter how fierce, was never without its battles. The restraining order had kept Linda and Robert at a distance, but their absence didn't erase the hurt. Caleb carried it quietly, in the way he sometimes stared out the window, lost in thought. Elias noticed, and he made it his mission to fill those silences with joy. He planned a surprise for Caleb's 28th birthday, a rooftop party at a friend's loft in West Loop, with fairy lights, music, and all the people who'd become their chosen family. Caleb's eyes lit up as he walked in, and for the first time in weeks, his laughter was unguarded. "You did this for me?" Caleb asked, pulling Elias close as the city sparkled below them. "I'd do anything for you," Elias said, and he meant it. The party was a turning point, a reminder that they weren't alone. Elias's friends, the community center crew, even Rosa from the coffee shop, they all showed up, their presence a shield against the world's cruelty. Miguel was there too, quieter than usual but trying. He pulled Elias aside later, his voice gruff. "I see how happy he makes you," he said. "I'm working on it, okay?" Elias hugged him, a weight lifting. "That's all I need." But life, as always, had a way of testing them. A week after the party, Caleb got a letter. Not from his parents, but from Hannah. She was coming to Chicago, alone, and wanted to meet. Caleb was torn, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "She's the only one who ever tried to understand me," he said. "But what if she's just here to pull me back?" Elias held his hand. "You'll never know unless you talk to her. And I'll be there if you need me." The meeting took place at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and warm lighting. Hannah, 25, had her brother's green eyes but a softer demeanor. She hugged Caleb tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have done more to protect you." Caleb's voice broke as he told her about his life in Chicago, about Elias, about the poetry and the community that had become his home. Hannah listened, her face a mix of regret and pride. "I want to be part of your life," she said. "Not as a spy for Mom and Dad, but as your sister." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. Hannah promised to keep their parents at bay, to be the bridge Caleb needed. When she left, Caleb turned to Elias, his smile fragile but real. "I think I can do this," he said. "I think I can be okay." The months that followed were a slow, steady climb. Caleb's poetry was published in a local literary magazine, a small victory that felt huge. Elias landed a big freelance project, designing posters for a queer film festival. They moved into a new apartment together, a cozy place in Rogers Park with a view of the lake. It wasn't perfect. There were still nights when Caleb woke from nightmares, or when Elias doubted he could be enough, but they faced it all together. One spring morning, as the city bloomed with new life, Elias and Caleb sat on their balcony, coffee mugs in hand. The lake sparkled in the distance, and the air was soft with possibility. Caleb leaned over, kissing Elias gently. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing me, for fighting for me." Elias smiled, his heart full. "Thank you for letting me." Their story wasn't over. Love stories never truly are. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but also more mornings of coffee and kisses, more nights of poetry and laughter. They'd met in a gym, two strangers with no idea how their lives would intertwine. Now they were building a home, not just in Chicago, but in each other, proving that love, when fought for, could be the most human, most beautiful thing of all.